September 11th had basically
on this vote, the yeas are 217, the noes are 182. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question is on passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman from California requests a yeas and nays. Those in support of the request will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And apologies, we did have to cut off our last caller there as we were taking your calls, and wanted to let you know the House, of course, came back, announced the vote tally on the last vote, moving forward on this final passage vote. And while they're in this vote, the final one of the evening that's scheduled for this evening, going to take a look at Republican Congressman Peter King of New York. He was in New Hampshire today, and he talked about the government shutdown. He criticized his own party's approach to the government shutdown.
I said from the start, this was madness. Republicans, 30 or 40 Republicans in the House of Representatives allowed themselves, basically, I think, to be hijacked by Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, over the summer. Now, let me tell you, you can go back and check. There's virtually nobody was talking about defunding Obamacare in April, May, or June. Suddenly in August, this issue developed, and people came back to Congress in early September, and this became this great issue among Republicans, so he had to shut down the government unless the President agreed to defund Obamacare. Now, I voted against Obamacare 42 times. I think it's wrong and it's going to be harmful. I think it's going to be particularly harmful to certain states. I know from talking to people in New Hampshire the impact it's going to be having here. But that's almost a separate debate. But again, I am against it and clearly against it. And yet, somehow it came down that unless you were willing to defund the government, to close down the government, if Obamacare was not defunded, this became an article of faith. This became almost, you're not a real conservative unless you voted to shut down the government. And I always thought conservatives believed in stability and institutions and to go forward. I also thought this whole idea almost of nullification went out with the Civil War. You can't just pick a law you don't like and say you want it repealed. If you want to repeal something, you repeal it the way it was enacted. And the President and the Democrats, I mean, give them credit in their way. They got it through the House, got it through the Senate. The President signed it. Supreme Court upheld it. And last year we had an election. If we're going to repeal it, we should elect more Republicans and then elect a Republican President. And we're not going to do that if we continue policies of shutting down the government. But Ted Cruz said not to worry. So long as the House, and by the way, John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, said that he was against threatening to shut down the government if Obamacare was not defunded. Eric Kent, the majority leader, said he was against it, and they were not going to allow this to happen. And Ted Cruz said that, insisted that we vote to defund it, and he said, don't worry. If you vote to defund it and shut down the government, send it to the Senate. Harry Reid will back down. The President will back down. The government will stay open, and Obamacare will be defunded. Well, now we have the government shut down, and Obamacare is stronger than ever. And to me, what happened in the House was you had 40 or 50 Republicans who threatened to vote against the what we call the rule, without basically bring down the House, unless John Boehner voted to shut down the government and defund Obamacare, and send it to the Senate where Ted Cruz was going to take care of it. It was done based on what Senator Cruz said. It went to the Senate, and basically he spoke for 21 hours. He read Dr. Seuss. And that was it. He couldn't get it done. And so then he said we should keep fighting in the House. It reminds me of the kid in the schoolyard who holds the coats and tells other two guys to fight while he stands back. And also we find people such as Senator Cruz who are building up mailing lists and raising funds to use against other Republicans. So you have an internal party fight with 2 or 3 people in the Senate and 30 or 40 in the House directing the politics of the country right now, which would be great if it was only a Republican fight. You know, you can fight within a party. The fact is the government is shut down, and there is no immediate strategy to get out of this. And now we have coming up next week, or coming up on the 17th, the debt ceiling, which would really be a disaster if that goes.
You can watch that entire event with Peter King of New York online. Also, just wanted to thank everyone who called in during the last vote. If you didn't get a chance to weigh in, just check out our Facebook page. You can post comments there, and you can also engage other viewers who are chatting about the shutdown online. The House voting right now, final passage for a bill that would fund the FDA safety programs. It would go on from here to the Senate, where it's unlikely to pass.
All members voted. The sitting member with the change vote. On this vote, the yeas are 235 and the nays are 162. The joint resolution is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that I may hereafter be considered as the first sponsor of H.R. 139 for the purposes of adding co-sponsors and requesting reprintings pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 12. The bill, the Udall-Eisenhower Arctic Wilderness Act, was originally introduced by Representative Markey of Massachusetts.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Speaker requests unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the House will come to order. Come to order, please. The House will come to order. Take your conversations off the floor, please. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Senate Leader Harry Reid has been the most ardent proponent of his party's no compromise, no negotiation stance. The leader has even been unwilling to discuss a compromise to prevent a prolonged government shutdown. Now, we're moving into the second week of this shutdown. In an effort to avoid being labeled as an obstructionist, the Senate leader has altered his stance, at least rhetorically, and now claims there's already been compromise. Now, I would say to the Senate leader that there has been some compromise, but not in the Senate chamber. The compromise has come from 57 Democrats who joined with the majority in the House to pass targeted appropriation bills that will fund key departments and programs. Mr. Speaker, politics is often referred to as the art of compromise. It's essential to the legislative process and surely vital to a functioning democracy. Now, I commend my 57 Democratic colleagues in the House who understand this and encourage more to join them as we continue to pass target appropriations this week. Unfortunately, not until both chambers start compromising will we'll be able to end this shutdown. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to call once again for this House to end this shutdown now by passing the Senate-passed bill that the President will sign to reopen the government. Speaker John Boehner refuses to bring up this bill. This weekend, he claimed it doesn't have the votes to pass. While I'm no mathematician, basic math shows that the Senate-passed bill to end the shutdown would pass the House. 217 votes are needed for a bill to pass. Look at these numbers. With the votes of 198 Democrats and the 23 Republicans who have said publicly that they would support the bill would pass with 221 votes. Mr. Speaker, bring up the bill to end the Republican shutdown immediately.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a sad truth that our jaw-dropping $16.7 trillion national debt pales in comparison to the totality of future spending obligations the Congressional Budget Office forecasts. A change in spending habits and a reform to mandatory spending obligations isn't just advisable in this moment, it's absolutely essential for America's long-term financial health. But meaningful reform is impossible without leadership from the White House. Is President Obama willing to lead and enact reforms to make our country stronger? It appears not. The President has made it no secret that he is loath to engage in bipartisan negotiations, regardless of what's at stake, whether it be reopening the federal government for the American people or containing our debt crisis so our children and grandchildren aren't left to pay for previous generations' irresponsibility. Refusing to negotiate on the debt ceiling is code for refusing to make any changes to future debt, to reduce future debt. Mr. Speaker, as this body knows, it's foolish to take aim at the symptom without also treating the disease. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today I received an email from a woman who runs a small business in my district. I read it to you now. Morgan, as you know, I'm a small business with 36 employees, have been paying 75% of my employees' health care for over 20 years. Get a call from healthcare provider agent that although my renewal date is March 1, the companies are offering to renew on December 1st this year with a 9.8% increase. This is to beat what is anticipated as a 30 to 60% increase after all the effects of Obamacare. Needless to say, this has reignited my frustration with the so-called Affordable Health Care Act. Please stick to your principles. Continue the fight. Let me know what, if anything, I can do. Yes, ma'am, I will. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, in the last few days, this House has actually come together on two different measures here that would seek to ease a lot of the pain from the government slowdown. The sad thing is we can agree on everything the Republicans have been trying to pass out of here. The only thing we don't really agree on is what we're going to do with that portion of Obamacare. We've even moved towards you in that we're going to limit it to simply giving the rest of the American people a one-year delay in the mandate, as the President has called for big business and has been given waivers to certain individuals on. So we can agree on this. We can get this thing done on what we agree on right away. But it's imperative what we do, because we got three things going on that the American people don't like. They don't like this government slowdown. They don't like what they're seeing with Obamacare. And they don't like the impending things we're going to have to do with debt ceiling. All these things work together. The cost of Obamacare, the government regulatory system that is killing jobs, and the inability for us to get things done around here. The debt ceiling is a conversation we're going to have a lot about here in the very near future. And if we're not doing the things to work on a truly balanced budget, then there's no reason the debt ceiling doesn't keep going up year after year after year. We need to balance our budget, folks. We need to get the job done for fiscal responsibility. I'm not seeing that plan come from the White House or from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight I had a wonderful teletown hall meeting with my constituents from across the 10th District of Western North Carolina. We had a lot of discussions tonight about the government shutdown and about the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. My constituents gave me great feedback. They said, keep fighting, because we want to see a repeal of Obamacare. But they said, we want the President to come to the table and negotiate. We want Washington to work. I also asked my constituents if they had seen their health insurance rates go up as a result of Obamacare. 58% said they had seen rates go up. 9% said they'd seen them go down, and the balance said they'd seen no change. So clearly it's harming families with increased health insurance rates, and my constituents want a repeal. But they want Washington to work. And so I call on the President, I ask our friends over in the Senate to come to the table with House Republicans and try to come to consensus so we can move our nation forward and do what's right for the people.
The gentleman yields. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Danny Davis of Illinois for today, Mr. Lucas of Oklahoma for today and for tomorrow, Mr. Poe of Texas for today, and Mr. Rush of Illinois for today and the balance of the week.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would first ask for 5 legislative days to extend or revise legislative remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Congressional Black Caucus comes to the floor now, entering the second week of the House Republican-led government shutdown. Instead of allowing a simple yes or no vote on a bill that funds the government, Republicans continue to play irresponsible games that are hurting our country. The shutdown's impact on our already fragile economy, as previously predicted, is already beginning to take shape and is negatively affecting millions of Americans. There is a simple solution to this, however, and that is to bring a clean, continuing resolution to the House floor for a vote. The Senate has passed it, and if Speaker Boehner scheduled a vote, it would pass the House as well. But the House GOP is more concerned with catering to a fringe group of their caucus than leading for the American people. But there are serious costs to that inaction of leading for my constituents and constituents throughout our country. In Nevada, an estimated 11,000 Nevadans may be furloughed or directly impacted by the furloughs. At one of our Air Force bases in my congressional district, 1,100 Nevadans are affected by furloughs. Processing of claims at the VA and Social Security have slowed for new applicants, and Head Start programs are feeling the pinch of the shutdown. Tonight we come to this floor to raise these issues and others, to call on our colleagues on the other side and the Speaker to allow a clean continuing resolution to be brought to the floor. And at this time, I'd like to turn to the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, a leader who's been fighting for equality and fairness for all Americans, the gentlelady from Ohio, Congresswoman Fudge.
Thank you very much. I thank my colleague for yielding, and I thank you, as always, for continuing to lead this special order hour. Mr. Speaker, I wish I could stand on this House floor today and say that Republicans are playing with fire when they refuse to fund the government. But I can't do that, because what they are doing is much worse. They are playing with people's very lives. They have made it abundantly clear that they care more about scoring political points and embarrassing this administration than addressing the needs of the American people. The government shutdown has had an immediate impact on many people across this nation, furloughing more than 800,000 federal workers, stopping nutritional and clinical support for women, infants, and children, and delaying life-saving research at NIH. My office continues to receive calls from distressed constituents about the status of Medicaid, of Social Security, and of SNAP. While we can reassure them that such programs will continue to operate, their concern and anxiety demonstrates the price everyday Americans must pay when Congress fails. Over the past few years, no issue has consumed more of the public's attention than health care reform. But unfortunately, for the American people, much of what has been said bears no relation to reality. Republicans have tried to make the case that health care reform will raise health care costs catastrophically and drive up the cost of Medicare or increase the deficit. These claims are simply not true. The truth is the Affordable Care Act will slow overall health care spending, decrease Medicare spending, and decrease our deficit. All this will be accomplished while expanding health care coverage, cutting costs for seniors, and eliminating health disparities for communities of color. Unfortunately, Republicans are so focused on preventing the expansion of health care that they are willing to hurt individuals in communities that are still struggling to rebound from our economic downturn. Already as many as 19,000 children in 11 states have been left out of Head Start programs because grant money ran out on September 30th. Several large defense contractors have started placing workers on notice that they may be furloughed. The 9 million mothers and children that rely on the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, better known as WIC, are facing the possibility that they may lose their benefits, and our local federal courts may be crippled by furloughs as soon as next week. The growing economic impact of this shutdown is extremely difficult to measure. The human and social impacts, like the loss of money for food, housing, or educational opportunities, are impossible to quantify. The Affordable Care Act is the law of the land, passed by both chambers of Congress, signed by the President, and confirmed as constitutional by the Supreme Court. Until Republicans accept this fact, the government will be shut down and the American people will have been let down by the majority party of this body. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And at this time, I'd like to extend time to the Vice Chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horsford, for yielding time, and thank you for all the work that you do here in the House of Representatives. You represent your district well. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor tonight, quite frankly, very frustrated. I am frustrated as I stand here right now. Our federal government is shut down. This is the 7th day of a shutdown that did not have to happen. This is political theater at its best or at its worst. And who's paying the price? It's the American people who are feeling the pain. This shutdown has been engineered and manufactured by House Republicans. And anyone paying close attention to what's happening here in the House will come to the quick conclusion that it's not the Democrats who have manufactured this crisis. It is the Republican majority that has done so. There are votes on the floor tonight that could pass a continuing resolution to get this behind us. I can tell you that most, if not all, of House Democrats will vote for a clean CR, and many of my Republican friends would do the same. I dare not call my Republican friends by name, but many of them. I had two tonight to visit with me on the House floor to say that they are willing to do it. But yet Republicans feel that somehow that they can use the budget crisis as a means for defunding the Affordable Care Act. It will not happen. It is the law of the land. It is fully implemented. It has been approved by Congress, signed by the President, tested by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it is now fully operational as of October 1st. Open season for the health insurance marketplace began several days ago, and nearly 3 million people have visited healthcare.gov on the first day alone. Americans who before lived with the constant fear of financial ruin if they got sick because they never had health insurance flooded the website, Mr. Speaker, in huge numbers to sign up for coverage. Right now, there are more than 600,000 Americans living in a household forced to file bankruptcy because of unpaid medical bills. More than 60% of all bankruptcies filed last year were because of medical bills that could not be paid. Many people forced to file for bankruptcy because of medical expenses actually had insurance, but were hung out to dry by insurance companies that dropped them from coverage simply because they had that power. Obamacare makes that a thing of the past. Beginning on January 1st of next year, Americans can no longer be denied coverage or dropped from coverage for having a pre-existing condition. All plans must include coverage for outpatient and emergency services and hospitalizations and maternity and newborn care and mental health and prescription drugs. I'm very proud of this plan. There will no longer be a yearly or lifetime limit on how much insurance companies will pay out for care. That the House Republicans will hold the federal government and its more than 4 million employees hostage over a law that on all counts seems to provide a great benefit to Americans defies logic. Mr. Speaker, this is not a game, though my Republican colleagues seem to think that it is. They are not working with any sense of urgency and don't seem to comprehend the seriousness of the nation's fiscal crisis. And just yesterday on national television, the Secretary of the Treasury, Jack Lew, warned us of what the consequences could be. This isn't about who wins or loses. We aren't keeping score, but the American people are keeping score, and they can't figure out Republicans' outright obsession with Obamacare while the federal government isn't open for business. It makes no sense. Democrats who have come to the floor for the past week asking and begging for House Republicans to permit a vote on the Senate's clean continuing resolution. I will repeat for the last time, it will pass this House tonight if the Speaker of the House, Mr. Boehner, will put it up for votes. The votes are here right now to pass the Senate version of the continuing resolution. I would urge the Speaker of the House, who is a decent individual who I've gotten to know over the years since I've been here, I would hope that he will finally say to the extreme right in his caucus that he has done all that he could to lift up the issues that they care about, but now it's the future of the country that we must all care about. Speaker Boehner, this week, sir, please bring the continuing resolution to this floor and see if the votes are here. They will be here. We can reopen the government, and then we can sit down and reconcile our differences. I thank you, Mr. Horsford, for yielding time, and I thank all of you who are standing strong in this debate. I yield back.
Thank you to the Vice Chairman, Mr. Butterfield, for your constructive remarks, and again for calling once again for the Speaker to bring a clean resolution to this floor. And we know that the votes are here to pass a clean, continuing resolution, one that would reopen government, one that would be supported by Republicans and Democrats. And so the Congressional Black Caucus comes to this floor at this hour to ask the Speaker of this House to do the will of the people and to do the will of this body.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. At this time, I'd like to extend the floor to a great man, a civil rights icon, a man who speaks truth to power, the gentleman from Atlanta, from Georgia, excuse me, Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend and my colleague for yielding the time. Mr. Speaker, it is a shame and a disgrace. Furthermore, it is really, really sad that the government of the most powerful country in the world is closed. It is closed. It is unbelievable. It is unreal. It is downright embarrassing. I wonder what the rest of the world think of us. We go all around the world preaching democracy. One person, one vote. And we will not even give the members, all of the members of the House of Representatives, an opportunity to vote on a clean effort, a continued resolution to end the shutdown. Give the members, please, give the members, all of the members, Democrats and Republicans, an opportunity to cast a vote, a free and open vote. That's what our founding father struggled for. People died for the right to participate. And in the House of Representatives, in this House, the people's house, we will not provide an opportunity for all of the people to vote. We must end the shutdown and put our people back to work and keep our economy growing and moving. We don't want to go back, my friends, or stand still. We want to go forward. Let's come together, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, come together and end this shutdown for good. We can do it. We made hard and tough decisions before, and we can do it again. And we must do it because it's the right thing to do. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Lewis, and for pricking the conscience of this body, for doing what's right at a time when the country expects that of our elected leadership. I'd like to yield at this time to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Nevada for yielding. Mr. Speaker, it's time to end this shutdown. The absurdity of it begins with the fact that we are now going to pay people for not working. We need to bring them back to work to provide the services and do the work that they're being paid to do. Mr. Speaker, this shutdown is really not based on reality. Some who've said, some apparently believe that if they just stay the course and keep the government shut down, that they'll be able to repeal or substantially undermine Obamacare. That's not going to happen. And so we're not based on reality. Now they're blaming Democrats for not negotiating. But there's nothing to negotiate. But we're talking about the budget. The Republicans came in with one number. The Democrats had a higher number. The Senate decided not to negotiate, but rather accept the Republican number. So we're in agreement. There's nothing to negotiate. Now, in the 1990s, when they had a disagreement on the budget, there were profound differences in the spending levels and tax and revenue levels. They couldn't agree on the budget. But we, at this point, at least for a short-term 6-week continuing resolution to keep the government open for at least 6 more weeks while we can negotiate, we've already agreed on the number. Now, the problem we're in right now is we just cannot reward people who have a tantrum and say we voted 40 times to repeal Obamacare and we haven't done it, so we're just going to shut the government down. You cannot reward that behavior, because there will become an expectation that every time there's the end of the fiscal year and you need a continuing resolution or the debt ceiling, there will be an expectation of reward. Now, no, this is not the end of the process. This is just the beginning. We're just talking about a 6-week continuing resolution. 2 weeks from now, we'll have the debt ceiling. 4 weeks after that, we'll be at the end of the 6-week period if we can reopen the government. They will be asking for things. Now, the fact is, the problem that we have is a recent article in Nation magazine. They revealed the strategy of the Republicans. They made a list of the kinds of things they will be looking for in the continuing resolution, the debt ceiling, every time there's an opportunity to shut down the government. And here's the list. They want to undermine Obamacare, Keystone Pipeline, offshore drilling, corporate tax cuts, business-oriented tort reform, sabotage Social Security and Medicare, undermine clean air EPA regulations, cut back on consumer protections, and end net neutrality on the Internet. Now, I suppose that after they've gotten the list, they'll say, well, we'll be reasonable, we'll negotiate. We'll only take half of the things that we don't have the votes to pass. We'll just take half. No. If you get to the point where there's an expectation of reward, then we'll be in that. Suppose the Democrats had thrown in maybe gun safety, marriage equality, immigration reform, and a jobs bill, and we're sitting up here trying to do the budget and have to do all of that and all of those and think we're going to ever come to a resolution. We have to have a clean CR so that we can reopen the government without all those complications. Now, back to Obamacare that seems to be provoking all this problem. The fact is our health care system was in trouble. The rates were going up, skyrocketing year after year after year. The problems with our health care system were not caused by Obamacare. Obamacare is trying to cure the problems. We had a gentleman earlier today say that people have looked at the rates, and some are paying a little more and some are paying a little less and some about the same. If that's the case, that is a miracle, because for the last 50 years, rates have been skyrocketing, going up much faster than inflation. So if they've been anywhere close to even, that would be a lot less than it would have been had not we had Obamacare. Now, we have the situation where it's affordable. Those with pre-existing conditions, people under 26 can stay on their parents' policies. Insurance reforms, preventive care provided without copays and deductibles, donut hole, on and on. This is a good deal. It will be much better than before. Another gentleman earlier today said, well, if you just eliminate the individual mandate. Well, the individual mandate is in every policy, because if you're going to cover pre-existing conditions, you cannot allow people to wait until they get sick before they buy insurance, because if that's the case, everybody will wait until they get sick to buy insurance. Everybody with insurance would be sick. The average rates would go through the roof. If you look at what happened in New York and the rates there, you can reasonably estimate that if you provided that exemption, the cost of insurance would double on the spot. So we can't have that. So we need to just proceed. If you want to improve Obamacare, let's talk about improving it. But in the meanwhile, it is not going to be repealed. It's not going to be undermined. And this idea that you can keep the government open piecemeal by having one agency at a time is absolutely absurd. Passing those bills would only serve one purpose, and that is to perpetuate and extend the shutdown. Now, the fact is that they don't have the votes to repeal Obamacare. They don't even have the votes to keep the government shut. If they called a vote, we'd reopen the government. We just want an up or down vote on reopening government. We've had several votes so far, procedural votes where we could have reopened the government, or at least have an up or down vote on reopening government. And as the gentlelady from New York pointed out, there are enough Republicans who are on public record as saying they would vote yes to give a clear indication that more than a majority of the House would be voting in favor. And so I want to thank the gentleman from Nevada for bringing us together. Obamacare is an important, it's very important advance in health care. It will cure all the problems they're talking about, and we don't need to reward anyone for shutting down the government or threatening the debt ceiling or shutting down the government in 4 weeks. We need to just reopen the government, and then we can have intelligent discussions about what to do about the budget. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia for his comments and for bringing up a number of key points. The main one, which I think gets lost, is the fact that the President and Democrats in both the House and the Senate have compromised. They've compromised on the lower budget number to get to a 6-week agreement on funding the budget in order for us to have a longer-term negotiation for the budget in subsequent years. That is a major point that I think the Speaker and those on the other side tend to forget. That was a number that the Speaker himself offered up in July and said that he would bring a clean continuing resolution to the floor in July at the very number that Democrats are prepared to say yes to. So what we're here to say, Mr. Speaker and members on the other side, is take yes for an answer. We're ready. There are 195 Democrats who are ready in this House, some 20 Republicans who publicly said that they're ready to support a clean continuing resolution, and there are probably more that would vote for it once it's brought to the floor. So I'll yield now to the gentlelady from Maryland, Congresswoman Edwards, at this time.
I thank the gentleman from Nevada for yielding. And I want to echo what my colleagues have said. It is time for us to bring a clean funding resolution to the floor of the House that would get a majority of Democratic support, and it would get strong Republican support to reopen the government. Not to reopen it in pieces, but to reopen all of government for all Americans. And it's time for us to do that now. Now, we've had several funding bills that have come to the floor to fund bits and snippets of the federal government, but that's really not the way to do it. And in fact, as the gentleman knows, that when the government was shut down by Republicans, it wasn't shut down piecemeal, and so it should not be reopened piecemeal. It should be opened in full. Today in my office, I happen to represent a district in Maryland that has a lot of federal workers who work at virtually every agency of the federal government. And I would note that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have brought forward piecemeal funding bills that fund a handful of agencies. Well, there are 486 federal agencies, and we haven't brought 486 funding bills to this floor, and so it's rather silly to propose funding the government in these little snippets. But these three workers were in my office. One of them works for the Environmental Protection Agency. The other works for the Department of Health and Human Services, and in fact, at the Center for Medicare Services. And the other one works at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And as I talk to the workers, number one, I can't even begin, Mr. Speaker, to explain to you how devastated they felt with being tagged non-essential, knowing that their work is vital, but not really feeling validated as workers. And so that was kind of one thing. But the other thing is that they're doing their jobs because they believe in their jobs. They believe in the work that they are doing for the government. They believe in the work that they are doing for taxpayers. And then lastly, they're worried about all of the work that goes undone. They're worried at EPA that letting the public know about inspections and about conditions of water and other things in the environment in communities across this country is not happening because the EPA is not in business. The worker who was in my office, Julia, who works at the Department of Health and Human Services, Mr. Speaker, is worried because in the work that she does, her specific job is to train Medicare providers so that they indicate the right codes when they submit for payment so that there's not fraud. And the other part of her job is that she's supposed to look through those claims and make sure that if there is any indication of a problem or fraud, that it gets referred to the Inspector General and gets referred to the Department of Justice. And at a time when we're both implementing health care, but also when Medicare is being used, it's really important that actually her job, Julia's job, actually saves taxpayers money, and yet she's at home. The worker who came to my office today, Emma from NASA, is very concerned because part of her job is working on systems that would help deliver us our next generation of weather satellites because we have a gap in our satellite coverage. And the farther we get behind in developing that new weather satellite, it means that it puts all of us in jeopardy in terms of receiving the information that we need. And of course, Mr. Speaker, as Americans know, we don't get our weather from the Weather Channel. We get our weather from the National Weather Service, from the folks at NOAA, from the people at NASA, and yet they are at home. The other thing that these workers explained to me is it's great personal cost to them. Secunda, who works at the Environmental Protection Agency, told me today that she takes care of her mother, in addition to herself and other family members, on her salary, and that she has been worried and up night and unable to sleep because she's not really clear how she's going to be able to meet those expenses. Julia, who works at CMS and HHS, has an 11-year-old child who has had brain damage when he was born, and he's a special needs child. And Aiden has a wonderful smile and a beautiful, face and voice, and he needs his mom, but they've also been able to take care of services for him with the salary that she makes at HHS. Julia told me, Emma rather, at NASA, said to me that her 12 and 14-year-old really don't understand why she's at home instead of going to work. And so these workers aren't just sort of faceless bureaucracy. They have lives and they have responsibilities, and yet with the federal government shutdown, we're not enabling them to meet those responsibilities. And then, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that they said to me is that if you open up the government piecemeal, it doesn't really help them out. Take the example of Julia at HHS. If her job is to make referrals to the Department of Justice and to the Office of the Inspector General, and she's at her job if by some fortuitous chance our Republican colleagues decide to restart HHS, what that means is that she doesn't have anybody to refer that fraud to because they're not on the job at the Department of Justice. If NASA is working and NOAA is not, then that joint work that takes place between agencies can't. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, what we do know is that every week that the federal government is shut down, it costs taxpayers $10 billion. $10 billion every week that the federal government is shut down. And Mr. Speaker, the federal government has been shut down now for a week. Chalk up $10 billion to the taxpayers. And so you can see that the entire purpose of the strategy to shut down government is in fact costing taxpayers money. And finally, I will share with you, I read in the paper today, Mr. Speaker, that 3 scientists and researchers won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. 2 of those, they won the prize for developing a way to track cell traffic so that it could make determinations about when appropriate packages of cells in the body are being delivered for certain purposes. And in doing that, it could help us make discoveries for immunological diseases, for neurological diseases, for things like diabetes. These scientists actually had been working, some of them had been working under a grant from the National Institutes of Health for about the last 30 years. And it made me think that if we are not funding the National Institutes of Health and other government agencies that do research right now, that the work that they've been doing for the last 30 years is work, if you think forward 30 years, that we're going to be missing because we have failed to fund the kind of research that we need. And so there are ripple effects to the cost of shutting down the federal government. And then finally, in my district, I plan every year to have a college fair for the students in my district. Usually about 2,500 to 3,000 students show up. Our college fair is coming up, supposed to come up this weekend. We usually get assistance from NASA. They bring all kinds of projects and experiments to the science fair to get young people engaged in the science, technology, engineering, and math STEM fields so that we can get them invested in tackling these jobs for the 21st century. We usually get assistance from the Department of Education to educate young people about loan and grant opportunities that might be available to them as they decide to make their college selections. And so I just got an email, even as I was sitting here on the floor, that none of these agencies will be able to participate in a college fair for our young people who are preparing to go to college next year. And they are going to miss out on those opportunities about learning what's available to them and the challenges that they face because the federal government is shut down. This is a really sad commentary, Mr. Speaker, on the impact of the shutdown and the ripple effect that that has both throughout our economy and in our local communities. And so I will close by urging Speaker Boehner, Mr. Speaker, to please bring a clean funding bill to the floor of the House of Representatives. Let it up for a vote. And you know what? If it fails, it does. But I know that in this body, Republicans and Democrats like me will support that bill. And we'll do it even though I don't agree with the number. I never supported the number. But I know that even though it is a Republican number, I'm going to agree with it because it will restart government. It is time, Mr. Speaker, for us to open up all of the federal government for all Americans. And with that, I yield.
I thank the gentlelady for her remarks and for bringing the real-life names and stories about how and who this furlough and impact of the government shutdown really affects. Those are the individuals, the public servants who provide critical services each and every day who deserve to go back to work. And again, we're asking that the Speaker bring a clean continuing resolution to the floor so that government can reopen. And like the gentlelady from Maryland, I myself have heard from my constituents who are affected by this, many who have sent emails and called my office. There's one by the name of Alex, a Department of Defense employee who got married a week before the shutdown and was furloughed a week ago today. Now, is that the Republican Party's idea of a honeymoon gift? This has to end, and it has to end now. I got some letters today from a 5th grade class of students from Sandy Miller Elementary School in Nevada who wrote to me because they're planning a trip to the Grand Canyon. But now it looks like that trip may be in jeopardy because the government shutdown is threatening access to the Grand Canyon. They wrote to tell me, to provide some advice to me on how to solve these problems and to ask if Congress could start acting a little like 5th graders, maybe we could get something done around here. I'd like to share just 3 of some of their remarks from the letters that they wrote. Stephanie writes, You should be respectful of each other. Be communicators, but most of all, be balanced and open-minded. Rossi said, you should be reflective about how you are affecting other people, not just yourself. If my class can compromise and get along, you and your colleagues in Congress should too. George wrote, Congress should start cooperating and working as a team like we do here in school. The message is pretty clear. As one of the writers, Balin, put it, if fifth graders can get along, you can too. Well, I sure hope that's the case, Mr. Speaker, because if we can't work together to do the people's business, then we shouldn't be here. And maybe we should turn the gavel over to them. I now yield the floor to my friend, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Nevada for chairing this hour tonight. And just as I reflect, Mr. Speaker, on the comment made by those fifth graders, well, I'm glad I'm in tune with them, because you see, through this whole ordeal, I have spoken about people who have narrow agendas, where they're only thinking of themselves and not the totality of the common good in the United States. Because you see, it's disingenuous and hypocritical to one day vote for the shutdown of the government and the next day show up at the World War II Memorial and stand with the veterans saying this is horrendous what has happened. You can't have it both ways. I did not vote for the shutdown of the government, so maybe I should have been there at the World War II Memorial saying the things that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been saying as they voted to shut down the memorial. I want to share a story with you from a young lady in my district. Just a day or two ago, she's a young mother. And in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, where I represent the people of that town, she went to the Young Fathers Program at Rutgers University with her 2-year-old daughter. Due to the government shutdown, this young mother no longer is receiving her WIC benefits. And in desperation, she is reaching out to anyone and everyone for help, as her child literally starves from lack of nutrition assistance. She doesn't know where to go or who to turn to. She feels totally alone. She doesn't know how she'll feed her child or how she'll make ends meet. This story breaks my heart, and unfortunately, she is not alone. There are millions of pregnant women and new mothers just like her across the country who don't know how they'll feed their child. And what breaks my heart even more is knowing that Congress has the power to open this government tonight. The votes are here, Mr. Speaker. Let's pass a clean CR. Make no mistake, this is a Republican government shutdown. The extreme faction got exactly what they wanted. Well, I ask you, did the American people get exactly what they wanted? The people I represent didn't. Families across New Jersey's 10th congressional district who won't get the Hurricane Sandy relief that they were counting on didn't. Veterans who put their lives on the line for this country didn't. Low-income children kicked off a Head Start didn't. 31,000 furloughed federal workers in New Jersey didn't. 9 million women, infants, youngsters that rely on the WIC program certainly didn't. So I ask, why are my Republican colleagues, who are they listening to? Whose interests are they representing? Instead of reopening the entire government for everyone, House Republicans hold the country hostage. Their piecemeal approach, picking winners and losers, choosing which parts of the government are worthy of opening. We must open the entire government and do what we can to do it today. 200 Democrats have signed a petition to bring a bill to the floor that would open the government today. And more than 20 Republicans have said they would also vote for the bill. So, we have the votes. The question is, why won't Speaker Boehner bring the bill to the floor? One that he knows will pass. One that would reopen the government today. Because it's not too much to ask members of Congress to do their job. It's not too much to ask to reopen the government and pay our bills on time. The people I represent have to do their jobs and pay the bills on time every single day. Why can't the leaders of this nation do the same? Every day it goes by, the more we drive up the costs for the American people, and the more we threaten the stability of our nation's economy. We cannot keep the government closed, and we cannot default on our debt. So I strongly urge my Republican colleagues to stand up for the American people. Bring a bill to the floor that will reopen the government today, and let's start doing the job expected of us and continue to move our country forward, not punish the American people by moving it backward. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. May I inquire as to how much time we have left, Mr. Speaker?